There are two kinds of phone calls that change your life forever. The first kind is the one where a doctor's voice goes quiet before she speaks, and you realize the quiet itself is the warning. The second kind is the one where you call your mother, and she tells you that your dying is your problem to solve, not hers. I got both kinds in the same week. I want to tell you what happened after that, because what happened after that is the reason I'm sitting here today, alive, breathing, with a new kidney, and a truth that took 29 years to find. But before I get to the justice, and there is justice, I promise you, the kind that a judge delivers from a bench while your so-called parents sit there watching their entire constructed reality get dismantled word by word. I need you to understand what it felt like to be me before any of this happened. I need you to understand what it feels like to always know something is wrong and never be able to name it. My name is Sarah. I grew up in a house in Oyster Bay, Long Island, with two parents, a brother 4 years older than me, a golden retriever named Chester, and a feeling that never fully left me. This low, persistent hum beneath everything, like a radio signal that never quite resolved into a station. I was Sarah Brennan. That was my name. That was my family. That was my life. Except it wasn't. Not really. Not at all. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March, and the thing about receiving life-altering medical news is that the room doesn't change around you. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Alvarez's office on East 72nd Street kept buzzing at exactly the same frequency they had been buzzing at when I walked in. The framed print of Central Park on the wall didn't shift. My hands sat in my lap exactly where I'd placed them, and they looked like my hands, and the air tasted exactly like recycled hospital air, and yet everything was completely different because the doctor had just told me that my kidneys were failing. Stage 4, chronic kidney disease, progressing faster than she would have expected in a 29-year-old. I needed a transplant. The national waiting list ran approximately 4 years at my blood type. My body, she said carefully, looking at me with those trained, kind eyes that doctors develop over years of delivering information that destroys people, might not have 4 years to wait. She thought I had maybe 18 months before dialysis alone couldn't maintain my quality of life. Dr. Alvarez had walked me through the options with the careful patience of someone who did this regularly and had not yet lost the ability to see the person in front of her. She explained the difference between deceased donor and living donor transplants. She explained that living donors, relatives ideally due to better genetic compatibility, had outcomes that were measurably, significantly superior. She explained the national registry, the waiting list, the factors that determined position on it. She said the words blood type and antigen matching, and she said family members are typically the best candidates. And she watched my face as she said it, and I must have looked like I understood because she didn't explain further. She said, "Do you have family members you might approach? A parent, a sibling? The compatibility testing process is a simple blood draw. It's not a commitment to donate, it's just information." I said yes, I had family. I left her office with a packet of information that I carried to the elevator and through the lobby and out onto East 72nd Street, where the March wind came off the park 2 blocks west and hit me full in the face, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the packet in my hands and the pedestrians moving around me like water around a stone. Of course my parents will do this. Of course they will. People who love their children get tested. I drove back to my apartment in Brooklyn that afternoon in a cab, staring out the window at the East River as we crossed the bridge, watching the water catch the late winter light. I was 29 years old. I had a small apartment in Carroll Gardens that I'd furnished slowly over 3 years, a job I liked as a graphic designer for a mid-size agency on Flatbush Avenue, a boyfriend named Tom who made excellent coffee and terrible jokes, and had never once forgotten my birthday. I had a life that I had built carefully, specifically, choosing each piece with the deliberateness of someone who grew up feeling like she never quite fit anywhere and needed to construct fitting from scratch. I counted backward from 18 months in the cab. 18 months from now would be August of next year. I had a freelance contract that renewed in September, which I now wondered whether I would be alive to sign. Tom and I had been talking loosely about moving in together. We'd looked at a few apartments in Cobble Hill, half seriously, the way couples do when they're circling toward something permanent. I thought about those apartments now. I thought about a 2-bedroom in Cobble Hill and whether I would ever live in it. The cab driver had the radio on, something Latin, something with a bright melody that felt impossibly incongruous with the contents of my head. I watched the water below the bridge and thought about the transplant packet in my bag, and thought about my family. My parents, retired now, healthy, with their 5Ks and their Portugal trip, and their 2 kidneys each. My brother Marcus, 33, who ran marathons and had the physiology of someone who had never spent a serious day in a doctor's office. I thought, someone in that family is going to be willing to help me. I believed that completely. I had no reason yet not to. 18 months, maybe less. I thought about the transplant list. I thought about what I knew. That living donor transplants had far better outcomes, far shorter timelines, far higher success rates. I thought about the simple arithmetic of biology. My parents each had 2 kidneys. You only need one to live. My brother had 2 kidneys. Even a cousin, an aunt, an uncle. There were people in my family who might share enough genetic material to make them viable candidates. And I thought, as I watched the skyline slide past the cab window, that my parents would want to help me. That of course they would want to help me. That whatever distance had always existed between us, whatever that low hum was, that frequency that never resolved, when it came to this, when it came to their daughter's life, they would want to help. I called my mother from the lobby of my building, standing next to the mailboxes, still in my coat, too distracted to think about going upstairs first. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her about the diagnosis. I told her about the timeline. I told her what I needed from her and from Dad. Just a blood test. Just the initial screening to determine compatibility. Nothing more than that unless they wanted it to be more. I tried to keep my voice steady. I tried to sound reasonable and calm, because I had learned from a very early age that in my family, the way to get things from my parents was to ask without sounding like you were asking, to need things without appearing to need them. There was a pause after I finished explaining. Then my mother said, "We've talked about it, and we've decided this isn't something we're comfortable doing. This is your problem to solve, not ours." I stood very still. Your problem, not ours. The cold of the Brooklyn lobby wasn't just the February air coming in under the front door. It was internal. It spread from somewhere in the center of my chest outward, reaching my fingertips, reaching the back of my throat. "Mom." My voice came out wrong, too thin, too careful. "It's just a blood test to see if you're compatible. That's all I'm asking." "Sarah, we're not discussing this further. Your father and I are in our 60s now. We have our own health to think about." She was 63. My father was 64. They ran 5Ks together every weekend. I'd seen the photos on Linda's Facebook page, both of them in their expensive running gear, smiling at finish lines, medals around their necks. They were the healthiest people I knew. They went to farmers markets in Cold Spring Harbor. They took a trip to Portugal last October. "People donate kidneys all the time," I said. "It's safe, and the recovery period is—" "The answer is no. We've made our decision." A pause. The particular kind of pause my mother deployed when she was signaling that she considered a conversation finished. "You'll need to find another solution." She hung up. I went through the 5 stages of receiving that information in the wrong order. First, denial. She didn't mean it like that. She was shocked by the news. She'd call back. She didn't call back. Then a strange, detached analysis. My transplant coordinator had said parents are almost always willing, which meant Linda had just made herself a statistical anomaly in a category defined by its uniformity. Then something that wasn't quite anger, but was adjacent to it. A kind of cold astonishment that a human being could say those exact words to a child who was dying. Your problem to solve, not ours. I had called her from a lobby because I had been too stunned to go upstairs first. Now I was still in the lobby. Phone in hand, coat still on, standing next to a row of metal mailboxes, and the door to the street kept opening and letting in February and letting in other people who lived here. People with groceries and keys and ordinary lives, and none of them looked at me, and I was grateful for that because I did not want anyone to see my face. I was 29 years old and my kidneys were failing and my mother had just told me it was my problem. I stayed in that lobby for probably 4 minutes. The mailboxes were the old kind, metal with individual combination locks, and I stared at them without seeing them, phone still pressed to my ear, my brain trying to process the information it had just received and refusing to complete the task. I called my brother Marcus next. Marcus answered on the first ring, which meant he was expecting my call, which meant he already knew. His voice had the particular quality of someone who had been rehearsing what to say and had not settled on anything satisfying. Marcus was 33. He worked in finance in Midtown. He had always had a gift for existing inside the family without registering the temperature of it. Or maybe he had registered it and learned more successfully than I had to calibrate himself accordingly. He'd been mom and dad's version of a normal child. Blonde, blue-eyed, successful, present, uncomplicated. They told me you'd called, he said. They said you were upset about a medical thing and that it was getting blown out of proportion. Getting blown out of proportion, I repeated. Their words. A pause. Sarah, I'm sorry. I really am. I don't think they should have said what they said. Did you tell them that? The silence was not comfortable. I don't want to get in the middle of this, he said finally. That sentence, I don't want to get in the middle of this, had been Marcus's position for our entire shared childhood. When Linda had sent the email disinviting me from Thanksgiving, Marcus had called to express private sympathy and public neutrality. When I had tried, as a teenager, to explain to someone outside the family why I always felt wrong in our house, Marcus had been the one to tell me, kindly but firmly, that I was probably just more sensitive than the rest of them. He had spent 33 years choosing the path that kept him inside the warmth, and he had never once had a reason to question whether that warmth was real. Yeah, he said, before I could say any of this. They told me yesterday, told me not to get tested either. Said it would be disloyal to them if I went behind their backs. A pause. His voice sounded genuinely uncomfortable, which was something, I supposed. I'm sorry, Sarah. You know how they are. I did know how they were. I had known how they were my entire life. I had spent 29 years in proximity to a coldness that I could never fully explain or justify, that I had long ago stopped trying to explain to other people because I could see in their eyes when they didn't believe me. Your parents? Surely they love you. All parents love their children. You must be misreading the situation. You must be too sensitive. You must be making this bigger than it is. But I had sat at my own birthday table watching my parents take the photographs. I had stood at the edges of family portraits that somehow never quite included me. I had been told, quietly, firmly, 100 times in 100 ways, that I was a peripheral element in a story that wasn't quite mine. This, what they had just done, felt like the same thing turned up to a volume I could no longer deny. This wasn't coldness. This was something else. My best friend Jade came over that night, arriving with 2 containers of soup from the Thai place we'd been going to since we were undergrads at NYU, and a bottle of wine she immediately set on the counter and said, I don't know if you're allowed to drink that. I don't know anything about kidney disease. I bought it because I didn't know what else to do. I'll drink it, I said. I need to. We sat at my kitchen table, and I opened my laptop because I needed to do something with my hands, with my mind. because sitting still with all of it felt impossible. I had a folder of scanned family photos, thousands of them, something I'd spent the better part of last Christmas break doing while I was home, scanning old albums, digitizing 3 decades of Brennan family history as a gift for my parents that they had received with the particular polite indifference they reserved for my efforts. I opened the folder now for a different reason. We went through photograph after photograph with the systematic focus of people who have stopped pretending they are doing anything other than building a case. Jade had a lawyer's instinct for evidence. She would have made a brilliant attorney herself. I'd told her so more than once. And she approached the photos the way she approached depositions, looking not for what was there, but for what was being carefully avoided. "When did you feel like you first knew something was off?" she asked, not looking up from the laptop. She was clicking through a folder I'd labeled Summer 1999. "Always," I said. "There was always something. But the first time I can really point to, I was maybe 9. There was a school assignment, a family history project. We had to draw a family tree going back 4 generations. I brought home the worksheet and showed it to Mom and asked her to help me fill it in. And she looked at it for a long time and then handed it back and said she didn't have good information on her parents' side. I asked about Dad's side. She said the records were incomplete. I paused. I sat in my room for an hour, making up names for the empty boxes so I could turn in the assignment. "Jesus," Jade said. The teacher sent a note home that my tree was incomplete. Mom signed off on my grade without commenting. I never asked about it again. Jade found a photograph from what looked like Easter Sunday. The family dressed up, standing on the front porch of the Oyster Bay house. Linda stood with one arm around Marcus, Robert's arm over her shoulders, all 3 of them forming a complete unit. I stood approximately 3 feet to their left, in the white dress Linda had bought me that year, hands folded at my waist, smiling in the direction of the camera, but not quite toward it. "You look like a guest," Jade said. "I felt like a guest," I said. "For 29 years. We scrolled through them. Me at age 3, my birthday party, a pink tablecloth and a grocery store cake. Marcus stood between Mom and Dad in the center of the photo, all 3 of them smiling directly at the camera, with matching blonde hair and matching blue eyes. I sat at the edge of the frame, facing sideways, as though I'd just arrived from somewhere else and hadn't been invited to turn toward the lens. I pointed at it. Jade looked. I showed her my high school graduation. I'd worn the blue cap and gown and stood in the backyard in the August heat, and someone had taken a dozen photos. The one Linda had framed and kept on the mantel for years showed Marcus and my parents standing together in the garden. The uncropped digital file, the one I'd scanned, showed me standing approximately 6 feet to the left, at the border of the image. "She cropped you out," Jade said. Not a question. "She framed it in the living room for 8 years. Jade was quiet for a moment, then, "Go back. That Christmas photo. How old were you?" "Maybe 7. Why?" She looked at it closely. Then she pulled up a different image. Marcus's college graduation, my father standing beside him, one arm over his shoulder. The resemblance between them was almost architectural. The same jaw, the same height, the same precise angle of the shoulders. "He's literally your dad's clone," Jade said. Then she looked at me, then back at 7-year-old me in the Christmas photo. "But you." I'd always known I looked different. My hair was dark and curly in a family of straight blonde. My eyes were brown when everyone else's were blue. I was 5'3". My mother was 5'9". My father was 6'1". Marcus was 6'2". They'd always attributed it to a recessive gene, to variation, to Dad's grandmother, a woman named Margaret who had died before I was born and whom no one could ever produce a photograph of. I had accepted this explanation the way you accept explanations when you have no alternative, and the question makes people uncomfortable. But sitting in my Brooklyn kitchen, with a terminal diagnosis and my parents' refusal still fresh in my ear, I looked at myself in a family photo and understood that I had been accepting an explanation for something I should have questioned much sooner. I couldn't sleep that night. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting up in bed with my laptop, doing the kind of searching that happens when the brain won't stop moving. I looked up my mother's maiden name. I looked up her hometown, a small city in upstate New York, north of Syracuse. I searched for birth announcements from late 1995, the year I was supposedly born in a house in Queens. I searched for anything. Nothing. I tried to access my own birth certificate. I'd need to request an official copy from the Office of Vital Records. I couldn't retrieve it online. But here was the thing that I noticed, sitting there in the dark, that I had somehow never consciously registered before. I had never held my own birth certificate. Not once. Every time I'd needed it. For my driver's license at 16, for college applications, for my passport. My mother had handled the paperwork. She submitted the forms. She received the documents. She handed me back the completed result. I had never held the source document of my own existence. Why hadn't I ever held my own birth certificate? I closed the laptop eventually. I lay in the dark and let the question sit in the room with me, large and formless and cold. The next morning, I called my transplant coordinator. Her name was Rebecca, and she had been kind and practical and competent throughout all of our interactions, and I liked her. I told her my parents had refused to test. There was a silence that lasted long enough for me to hear her draw a breath. "I'm sorry," she said. I've been doing this for 12 years. I've never heard of parents refusing, not even to test. Is there any possibility they might not be compatible? Could they know that somehow? Parents are almost always a close enough match to justify at least preliminary testing. The compatibility itself isn't the issue. The refusal is unusual. Another pause. "I'm sorry, Sarah. We'll work every other avenue." I hung up. Then I called Dr. Morrison's office, my childhood pediatrician in Hempstead, Long Island, the doctor who had seen me from infancy through age 18. I requested my full medical records, every page, dating to birth. They sent 237 pages by secure digital transfer. I read all of them. Most of the records were straightforward. The accumulated paperwork of an ordinary American childhood, the small medical punctuation of growing up, a bout of strep throat at age 4, the broken wrist at 9, a fall from the monkey bars at school, which I remembered because Dad had been the one to take me to urgent care, and he had sat in the waiting room reading a magazine and hadn't come in when they set the bone. A mild asthma diagnosis that resolved by high school, immunization records, vision screenings, the standard cartography of a healthy childhood. But I had requested the records for a specific reason, and I read them with the specific attention of someone looking for seams, for the places where the story didn't hold together. I found 3. The first was the notation at the very beginning about the NICU stay at an undisclosed hospital. I had already found this when I first opened the file, and it had been sitting in the back of my mind ever since. The second was a note from a visit when I was approximately 2 years old, a routine checkup, in which the examining physician had written, "Mother unable to provide prenatal records or records from previous providers." States records were lost during a move. This was not uncommon, the note said, but the doctor had flagged it. The third was the blood type notation. I was blood type O negative, documented clearly in the records. My medical intake forms listed my parents' blood types, as was standard for pediatric records at the time. Linda Brennan, B positive. Robert Brennan, A positive. I sat back from my laptop. 2 B positive and A positive parents cannot produce an O negative child. It's not possible. The genetics don't allow for it. I had taken enough biology in high school to know that much, and I confirmed it in about 3 minutes of searching on my phone. They had known. They must have known. The blood type had been sitting in my medical records for 29 years. Most of it was routine, ear infections, a broken wrist in 4th grade, annual checkups, immunization records, standard childhood documentation. But there was a note at the front, attached to the records from my earliest appointment at approximately 6 weeks of age. The note read, "Records prior to this date unavailable. Parents indicate birth occurred at home, followed by 3-week NICU stay at undisclosed hospital." I read it 3 times. My mother had always told me I was born at home. "Quick labor," she said. "No time to get to the hospital." "A midwife," she said, though when I'd once asked for the midwife's name, she'd been vague. "I'd had a brief NICU stay because I was small," she said. "A few weeks? Everything fine?" But the note said, "Undisclosed hospital," not "unnamed hospital," not "records from hospital pending." Undisclosed, meaning my parents had declined to tell the pediatrician where I'd spent the first weeks of my life. And it said home birth, but I'd been in a NICU. NICUs are in hospitals. You don't have a home birth and then go to an undisclosed hospital for a NICU stay. Unless the home birth didn't happen. Unless someone needed the story of a home birth to explain why there were no hospital records for the birth itself. I sat with this for a very long time. Then I ordered a DNA testing kit. It arrived on a Saturday, a small white box with a saliva collection tube inside, clinical and ordinary in the way that only objects capable of dismantling your entire life can be. The kit cost $129. It would tell me about my ancestry, my health markers, my genetic relatives, any blood family members who had also submitted their DNA to the same database. I told myself I was looking for potential donors. I told myself the other thing, the theory I couldn't quite articulate, was secondary. But my hands were shaking slightly when I registered the kit, and I knew that wasn't because of the kidney disease. I was testing something else entirely. The 6 weeks were the longest of my life in a specific, particular way. They were the length of time between a question asked and an answer you already know is going to change everything. I went to work every morning. I designed the client presentations and the brand materials and the quarterly reports that were my ordinary professional life, and I sat in meetings and offered opinions about typography and color, and I was present for all of it in the physical sense while some other part of me was in a constant suspended state of waiting. Tom noticed. Tom always noticed. "You're not here," he said one night over dinner, not unkindly. He was watching me stare at a bowl of pasta. "I mean, you're here, but where are you actually?" I put down my fork. I had not told him yet about the kit, not the full theory, not where my thinking had gone since Jade's kitchen. I had told him about the parents' refusal, which had outraged him in a clean, simple way. I had not yet told him about the birth certificate or the blood types or the NICU notation. I told him now. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, without reaching for reassurance or reframing. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "How sure are you?" "The blood types alone make it a near certainty," I said. "2 parents can't produce my blood type from their blood types. That's just biology." "What are you going to do if the test confirms it?" "Find out who I actually am," I said, "and find out if whoever that is can save my life." While I waited for the results, 4 to 6 weeks, they said, I built a team. Because you cannot dismantle your entire understanding of your own life by yourself, and I was beginning to understand that dismantling was exactly what was coming. The first member of my team was already there, Jade, who had looked at that Christmas photo and said what she'd said, and who was a paralegal at a family law firm on Park Avenue South, and who knew how to find things, and who had already looked up the legal standards for DNA evidence in New York State at 2 a.m. because she could not turn off that part of her brain any more than I could. The second was Tom, who had watched my family for 2 years with the confused clarity of an outsider who had sat beside me at the one Brennan family Christmas dinner he'd attended and driven home afterward saying, very carefully, "They don't treat you like everyone else, do they?" He'd watched my parents forget my birthday 3 years running. He'd been with me when I was uninvited from Thanksgiving. Actually disinvited. An email from Linda saying that my presence created tension for the family, that it would be better if I spent the holiday elsewhere. He'd sat with me while I processed that, and he'd had the wisdom not to tell me I was exaggerating. The third was my therapist, Dr. Chen, who practiced out of an office in Park Slope, and who had spent the last year and a half helping me understand why I felt like a stranger in my own family. She had asked me 6 months earlier, "Have you considered that the problem might not be you?" I had written it off as therapist optimism. I was reconsidering. The fourth was my mother's brother, my Uncle James, who lived in Boston and whom I'd always gotten along with, who called every Christmas and sometimes in between, who had a warmth that seemed at odds with his sister's particular brand of precision. I called James on a Sunday afternoon and told him what my parents had done. They what? His shock was immediate and genuine, the kind of shock that doesn't have time to be performed. "Sarah, that's insane. I'll get tested. Send me the information immediately." "Uncle James," I said, "can I ask you something? Anything. Do you remember when I was born? Do you remember my mother's pregnancy?" A pause. Not a defensive pause. A remembering pause. The slight hesitation of someone searching genuinely through old memory. "I remember meeting you for the first time. You were maybe 2 months old. Linda said they'd been dealing with complications. That's why they hadn't wanted visitors earlier. But do you remember her being pregnant?" Longer pause. "I was living in California that year. We weren't in close contact. I'd just started a new job." He went quiet. Thinking about it now, no. I don't have a specific memory of her being visibly pregnant. I assumed she had been. I closed my eyes. "Uncle James, what was your grandmother's name?" "Dad's grandmother. The one I supposedly look like." "Dad's grandmother? Her name was Margaret." A beat. "She had straight blonde hair. I've seen photos of her. Blue eyes. Why are you asking about her?" "Because I don't look like her. Because no one I know of with straight blonde hair and blue eyes has ever produced a child with dark curly hair and brown eyes through any number of generations, and I had been told for 29 years that I was the exception, because they'd lied about that too." "No reason," I said. "I'll send you the donor screening information." I hung up and sat in the stillness of my apartment and waited. The results arrived on a Thursday in May, 6 weeks to the day after I'd mailed the kit. I was at my desk at the agency when the email notification came through, and I closed my laptop in the middle of a client presentation file, put on my coat, and walked out. I said something to my coworker about a doctor's appointment. I walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, ordered something I didn't drink, and sat in the back corner and opened the app on my phone. I had 847 DNA matches. The database organized them by closeness, highest shared centimorgans at the top. I looked at the top entry. The label said, "Close family, first cousin." My closest match in the entire database was a first cousin, not a parent, not a sibling, a cousin, which meant that whatever Linda and Robert Brennan were to me, they were not my biological parents. A parent sharing that database would have appeared at the top of my matches. A parent would show more than 2,000 centimorgans of shared DNA. A parent's absence from these results was not a statistical anomaly. It was a biological fact. My hands were shaking. I clicked the profile. Username, Patricia 1968. She was 58 years old, lived in Syracuse, New York. We shared 1,750 centimorgans of DNA. I looked up the relationship estimator on the site's help page, hands still shaking. Phone screen slightly blurred. 1,750 centimorgans. Likely range. Aunt, half-sibling, first cousin once removed. Given her age relative to mine, the most probable relationship was aunt. She had a small photo on her profile. A woman with dark curly hair just beginning to gray at the temples. Brown eyes. She looked like me. I messaged her. "Hi, Patricia. This is going to sound strange, but I think we're related. Can we talk? She responded within the hour. I've been hoping someone would find me. I read those words 5 times. I've been hoping someone would find me. The past tense of hoping. The hoping that has become structural. That has stopped being acute and settled into the foundation of a life. I've been hoping for years. I've been hoping so long it's become part of how I describe myself to strangers, and to databases, and to the universe, in case the universe is listening. I sat in the back of that coffee shop for 10 more minutes, reading the words again, thinking about what they meant, not just what they told me about Patricia Nelson, but what they told me about the space I had been occupying in someone's life for 29 years without knowing it. Someone had been looking for me. Someone had been pointing their existence in my direction, quietly, persistently, while I grew up in Oyster Bay believing I was a strange and peripheral element in a family that didn't quite want me. I had been wanted. I had been looked for. I called Jade from the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, phone pressed to my ear, voice shaking in a way I couldn't fully control. They're not my parents, I said. A pause. How close is the match? Closest in the database, first cousin, and she responded. She said she's been hoping someone would find her. My voice broke, just slightly, on the last word. Sarah. Jade's voice went quiet. Are you okay? I think I'm going to be, I said. I think for the first time in my entire life, I might actually be okay. We talked that evening. I sat cross-legged on my bed with my phone pressed to my ear, and Patricia Nelson's voice came through the line, and it shook. This controlled, deliberate tremor. The voice of someone who has been holding themselves together for a very long time and can feel the structure beginning to give way. She told me everything in pieces, the way you tell something enormous, stopping and starting, circling back to clarify, finding that you've been holding a story for so long that the order of its telling no longer follows chronology but follows the weight of each part. Jennifer had been her little sister by 4 years. Patricia had been studying nursing in Albany when Jennifer started at Syracuse. They'd been close, the kind of close that adult sisters can become when they're no longer competing for parental attention, when they start recognizing each other as people rather than rivals. They had talked every week. Patricia knew about the pregnancy from almost the beginning. She didn't want to tell our parents, Patricia said. They were traditional, I guess you'd say. Strict. Jennifer knew they'd be devastated, and she was already devastated herself. She was 19. The father was someone from her biology class, a junior who told her he wasn't ready for that and who left for a study abroad program 2 weeks later. She was alone and scared, and she called me. What did you tell her? I told her I'd support whatever she decided. She thought about adoption, real adoption through an agency. She came close, but she couldn't. She said she could feel you moving, and she couldn't sign the forms. A pause. That's when Linda came into it. Linda had been 28 at the time, recently married to Robert living in New York City. She and Jennifer had a complicated relationship. Patricia described it as Linda always needing to be in charge of things, including Jennifer, and Jennifer spending her teenage years pushing back and then, when it suited her, letting Linda be in charge because it was sometimes easier than the alternative. Linda came up to Syracuse when Jennifer was 6 months along. She sat with Jennifer for a whole weekend. She was very warm about it, which, I know, from what you've told me, is not how you know her. But she could be warm when she wanted something. She told Jennifer that she and Robert had been struggling to conceive, that they would do anything to have a child, that Jennifer was in no position right now, financially or emotionally, to give a baby what a baby needed, but that they could. She said she just wanted to give Jennifer time, just borrow her baby while Jennifer grew into the person she was going to become. Patricia's voice went flat. She made it sound so reasonable. Jennifer believed her. Jennifer wanted to believe her. There's a difference. She was 19 and scared, and she loved her sister, and she needed a solution that didn't feel like giving you away permanently. Linda handed her one. A pause. I told Jennifer I had a bad feeling about it. She told me I was being paranoid. She signed the temporary guardianship agreement. Did you see the agreement? Not until years later. By the time Jennifer realized she needed to fight, she'd lost the original copy. Linda had handled all the paperwork. Jennifer had to track down the attorney who'd drafted it to get a copy. He'd retired to Florida. It took her 6 months just to find him. Patricia went quiet for a moment. She spent 4 years trying to undo a decision she made in 6 hours. That's what I need you to understand about your biological mother. She knew almost immediately that she'd made a mistake. She never accepted it as permanent. She fought every day to fix it, for as long as she lived. She said, "I'm your mother's sister. Your biological mother. Her name was Jennifer. She was my younger sister." Past tense. Was. The room held very still around me. Jennifer had you when she was 19 years old. She was in her sophomore year at Syracuse University. She wasn't ready to be a mother alone. The father wasn't in the picture. And she was going to college. She had her whole life. She had plans. She made an arrangement with Linda, my sister Linda, the woman who raised you. Linda had been trying to get pregnant for years. She and Robert had been going through fertility treatments for a long time, and nothing had worked. So Jennifer agreed to a temporary arrangement, just until Jennifer finished school and got financially stable. Just to give Linda a chance to have a baby while Jennifer figured things out. It was supposed to be temporary. She stopped. I heard her breathing. But Linda refused to give you back. As soon as the first few months passed and she'd moved you into her house, she and Robert relocated. They left Syracuse. They went to New York City. They cut off contact with the entire family. Jennifer tried for years to reach them. She hired a lawyer when you were 4 years old. She had a temporary guardianship agreement. There was never a formal adoption, Sarah. There was never anything legal. Linda just kept you because she wanted to, and she could. What happened to Jennifer? My voice came out flat, clinical, because it had to. She died in a car accident in 2003. You would have been 7. A pause. She never stopped trying to get you back, Sarah. She was saving money. She was meeting with attorneys. At the time of the accident, she was closer than she'd ever been. She'd found a lawyer in Manhattan who thought she had a strong case. Linda knew Jennifer was pursuing custody. She knew it was coming. Another pause, this one longer. When Jennifer died, Linda made sure none of us could ever find you. She changed your last name. Did you know that? I did not know that. Your birth name was Sarah Mitchell. They had it legally changed to Sarah Brennan when you were 8 years old. They used falsified documentation. We only found this out later, through an investigator Jennifer had hired before she died, whose records eventually came to us. A forged judge's signature, a non-existent court order. I had been renamed, not just taken, renamed, erased at the level of documentation, the level of legal identity, the level of the name by which a person is known. Patricia. My voice came back slowly. I have kidney failure. I need a transplant. The people I grew up thinking were my parents refused to get tested, and I believe now I understand why. I need help finding medical information. I don't even know what I need. I don't know where to start. I know where to start, Patricia said immediately. I'll get tested for compatibility as soon as you can tell me where to go. And I have everything else, Sarah. Jennifer kept records. I kept records. I have her medical history. I have the original birth certificate, the real one, from the hospital in Syracuse where you were born, with Jennifer listed as your mother. I have the temporary guardianship agreement. I have newspaper clippings about the custody proceedings she was preparing. I have photographs. She paused. I have photographs of Jennifer holding you when you were 3 weeks old. She looks exactly like you. The next 3 weeks were a reconstruction. Patricia sent documents in batches, scanned pages that arrived in my email each morning. that I printed at the FedEx on Atlantic Avenue and spread across my kitchen table, organizing them, reading them, building the paper architecture of a truth that had been buried for nearly 3 decades. Jennifer Mitchell's medical records, her immunization history, her blood type. The blood type that matched mine in a way that Linda and Roberts never could have. The blood type that would eventually be the foundation of transplant compatibility. Jennifer's college transcripts, proof that she had been a 19-year-old student with a GPA of 3.4 and a declared major in education and plans, specific articulated plans, for the life she was going to build. My original birth certificate, born in a hospital in Syracuse. Mother, Jennifer Ann Mitchell, age 19. Father, unknown. Date of birth, September 14, 1995. My actual birthday. Linda had changed that too. She'd changed my birthday by 2 days in all subsequent documentation, a small enough change to seem like clerical error, large enough to make record matching difficult. Photographs of Jennifer. I spread them across the table and looked at them for a very long time. She was 19 in the ones taken shortly after my birth. Dark curly hair, brown eyes, my exact cheekbones, my exact way of tilting her head. In one photograph, she was holding me, a tiny 3-week-old swaddled in a hospital blanket, and she was looking at me with an expression that I had never, not once in 29 years, seen on Linda Brennan's face when she looked at me. It was the expression of someone who loves what they're looking at. Simple and total and completely unguarded. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I took everything, every document, every scan, every piece of accumulated evidence, to Jade's boss. Margaret Wu had been practicing family law in Midtown Manhattan for 22 years, in an office on the 34th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, with a view of the MetLife building and a manner that made you feel simultaneously very safe and very aware that you should not be on the opposing side of anything she touched. She reviewed the documents across 2 hours while I sat in the chair across from her desk, hands folded in my lap, watching her face. She finished reading and looked at me. "Your adoptive parents never legally adopted you," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "There is no adoption record in New York state courts, or in any other state that we've checked. No valid court order. No relinquishment of parental rights by Jennifer. Nothing. They took you under a temporary guardianship arrangement, relocated, and then used falsified documentation to change your name and create the appearance of a permanent family relationship that was legally, at its foundation, non-existent." She paused. "Sarah, this is parental kidnapping. The statute of limitations doesn't apply because you only discovered it this year. The clock started when you had reasonable knowledge, not when the act occurred. What do we do?" "Several things simultaneously." She picked up a pen. "We file for a declaratory judgment to establish your true identity, to have the courts confirm that you are Sarah Mitchell, not Sarah Brennan, and that Jennifer Mitchell was your biological mother. We report the kidnapping to law enforcement, though I'll be honest with you, prosecution after 29 years is difficult, and we shouldn't make it the centerpiece of the legal strategy. We petition to have your original birth certificate restored, and we file to establish Patricia Nelson's right to be recognized as your legal next of kin for medical decision-making purposes. Will any of this affect my transplant timeline? Patricia is your biological aunt. Her kidney compatibility exists regardless of legal proceedings. But the legal recognition of next of kin will affect your decision-making authority, and we want that in place before surgery. We need to move." She set down her pen. "I'm going to bring in additional expertise." The team Margaret assembled was extraordinary. A forensic genealogist who cross-referenced the DNA findings against 3 independent databases and built a complete biological family tree, confirming Patricia's relationship to me with a statistical certainty that was, her report said, indistinguishable from absolute. A medical expert who reviewed my childhood records and documented the multiple irregularities, the NICU notation, The absence of any birth hospital records, the gap in the earliest medical documentation, as consistent with deliberate obscuring of medical history. An investigator who located the name change filings from 1993 traced them back to a specific courthouse in Queens and identified the judge's signature as belonging to a judge who had retired 15 years earlier and categorically denied ever signing the document. Someone had forged a judge's signature. Someone had forged it in order to rename a child who had never been legally theirs. I thought about that for a long time. Then I thought about Linda's voice on the phone. This is your problem to solve, not ours. And I went to see them. I went on a Saturday in October when the maple trees on their block in Oyster Bay were turning orange, and the air had the particular sharp quality of Long Island in autumn, the smell of leaves and salt water carried in from the sound. I drove myself. I had not been to that house in 14 months. I parked in front of it and sat in the car for 3 minutes, looking at the gray vinyl siding and the carefully maintained front garden and the American flag on the porch, and I felt something I had never consciously felt before in relation to this house. Nothing. No residual warmth. No complicated grief. Just clarity. Clean and cold. I rang the doorbell. Linda answered. She looked, as she always looked, composed and precise. Her silver blonde hair cut short, her posture correct, her eyes doing that thing they had always done, assessing me for what I cost her rather than what I was. I told her I had found my biological family. I told her I knew about Jennifer. I told her I knew about the temporary guardianship, and the name change, and the forged documents, and the court proceedings Jennifer had been pursuing when she died. What happened in Linda's face in that moment is something I have thought about many times since. It didn't break open. It didn't crumble. It went, instead, colder. A controlled, deliberate calcification, the face of someone who has always responded to threat by becoming harder. She said, "You were an unwanted baby from an irresponsible teenage slut. We gave you a home. You should be grateful." I had known it was coming. I had known, in the way you know things that you have been circling your whole life, that this was what they had always thought of me, what they had always used to justify what they'd done, what they had perhaps told themselves so many times that it had become their private gospel. Jennifer had been 19 and unmarried and in college and scared, and Linda had needed a child she couldn't produce herself, and everything that followed had been scaffolded on this lie, that Jennifer hadn't wanted me, that they had rescued something being discarded. The thing is, I had Jennifer's photograph, the one where she was holding me at 3 weeks old, looking at me like I was the most important thing in the world. I knew what Jennifer had wanted. I said, "You kidnapped me." "We saved you," Linda said, her voice flat and absolute. "Jennifer was unfit. She would have ruined your life." "You stole me from my mother," I said. "You stole me from my mother and let her die thinking she'd lost me forever. You let her spend every year of her life after I was taken from her believing she had failed. You cost her everything, and then she died, and you were relieved." My father appeared behind Linda. Robert Brennan, tall, silver-haired. The jaw and the posture and the blue eyes that had never once looked at me with the warmth he deployed so effortlessly with Marcus. He had always looked at me like a problem that had been successfully managed. He said, "If you pursue this, you're no longer our daughter. We'll contest everything. You have no proof." "I have DNA evidence. I have original documents. I have witnesses. I have attorneys." "You have nothing that matters. We raised you. That makes you ours." I looked at him. In 29 years, I had never seen Robert Brennan lose his composure in front of me. Never seen him angry. Never seen him warm. Never seen him anything other than this, the controlled, assured presence of a man who had always understood himself to be in command of his own life and of the people adjacent to it. He had built a successful career in commercial real estate. He had built a family in the precise configuration he had wanted. He had managed every variable. he had managed me. "Robert," I said, and I used his name deliberately. The way you use someone's name when you are no longer operating within the fiction that requires you to call them something else. You forged a judge's signature to change my name. You removed me from the records of my own existence. You knew, every year that Jennifer was alive and calling and filing documents and hiring attorneys, that she was out there trying to find her daughter. You knew, and you hid me. "We protected you," Linda said from behind him. Her voice had dropped to something I hadn't heard before, quieter, but no less certain. "You would have had nothing with her. You would have been passed between a teenager's bad decisions and a college dormitory and whatever man she was with that year." "She was a student who graduated with honors," I said. "I have her transcript." A flicker, the smallest contraction of something behind Linda's eyes. "She bought a savings bond with your name on it when you were 2 years old," I continued. "I have the paperwork. She was saving for you. She called her attorney every 6 weeks for 4 years. She never once stopped trying to come back for me." I paused. "You knew she was getting close. You knew, right before she died, that she'd found a lawyer in Manhattan who thought she had a strong case. Didn't you?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that house. "She was irresponsible," Linda said finally. The word came out slightly differently now, not the flat certainty of an unquestioned truth, but something more careful, something being chosen. "She made poor decisions." "She loved me," I said. "That's what it looks like. When someone loves their child, they spend the rest of their life trying to get back to them, even if it takes everything they have." He said it with such certainty, such complete, unquestioned certainty, the certainty of someone who has believed for 29 years that possession equals ownership, that the physical act of raising a child grants absolute authority over her identity, her body, her history, her name. I looked at him. I had spent my entire life bending myself around the reality of this house, shrinking to fit the space I was given, swallowing the knowledge that I was peripheral, that I was tolerated rather than loved, that I was my problem and not theirs. I had apologized for existing. I had tried, continuously and unsuccessfully, to earn warmth from people who had never had any intention of giving it. I had sat at the edges of photographs my whole life, turned slightly away from the center, and I felt something shift in my body. Not dramatic, not violent, quiet, like a door swinging gently on a hinge, opening onto a room that had always been there. My voice dropped, my breathing steadied. The cold in my chest, the same cold I'd felt in the lobby when Linda told me my dying was my problem, resolved into something different. Not cold. Still. Crystalline. Clear. I looked at Robert Brennan and I said, "No, it doesn't." 2 words. I turned and walked out of the house. I never went back. The legal proceedings unfolded across 3 courts simultaneously, a parallel architecture of accountability that Margaret Wu orchestrated with the precision of someone who understood that when you dismantle a lie this large, you have to dismantle it completely. In family court, we filed for restoration of my original identity and a declaratory judgment establishing the Mitchell family as my legal biological family and Patricia as my recognized next of kin. In civil court, Patricia's attorney filed a wrongful death claim on behalf of Jennifer's estate, arguing that Linda and Robert's actions had directly prevented Jennifer from pursuing custody before the accident that took her life, that they had not merely taken me, but had actively used their ability to hide me as a weapon against a young woman who had spent years trying to come back for her daughter. In surrogate's court, we filed to contest the distribution of Jennifer Mitchell's estate, which had been settled in 2003 without any knowledge of my existence as her surviving biological daughter. The executor, a cousin of Jennifer's who had long since moved to California, submitted an affidavit stating that had he known of my existence, the distribution would have been entirely different. Linda and Robert, who retained a firm from White Plains that specialized in estate and family litigation, mounted an aggressive response. They filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the passage of time rendered all claims moot, that the statute of limitations had expired, that no relevant legal standard could apply to events that had occurred 29 years in the past. The motion was filed late. Their attorneys missed the deadline by 3 days, a procedural failure that the court rejected the motion on without examining its merits. 3 days. 29 years of concealment, dismantled partly by a filing deadline. They filed for a continuance, claiming they needed additional time to gather evidence. The required affidavit was missing from the filing. Request denied. They attempted to argue that Jennifer had willingly and permanently relinquished her parental rights. The court required documentation. They could not produce it because it did not exist. The only document in evidence was the temporary guardianship agreement, 6 pages, dated 6 weeks after my birth, stating clearly that Jennifer Mitchell retained parental rights and that Linda and Robert Brennan were to serve as temporary guardians until Jennifer was financially stable. Jennifer had been 19 and a college sophomore when she signed that document. She had not signed away her daughter. She had signed over care temporarily to a sister she trusted. And then her sister had vanished. Somewhere in the middle of the 3rd month of proceedings, Linda and Robert's attorneys withdrew from the case. The letter cited irreconcilable differences with clients, the specific phrasing that means, in legal language, that the attorneys had been asked to do things they weren't willing to do, or that their clients had become ungovernable. Linda and Robert had to represent themselves for the final hearings. Robert stood at the respondents' table in Manhattan Family Court in a gray suit, alone, holding pages of notes in his hand, looking at the judge with the same expression he'd had when I walked out of his house, expressionless, controlled, still. But the hands holding the notes were shaking. The proceedings ran across 7 months. My transplant surgery, which had been scheduled for September, was postponed twice, once in October, once in November, waiting for legal clarity on Patricia's authority to make medical decisions as recognized next of kin. I understood the postponements intellectually, and they still wore on me in the way that all waiting wears on a body that is counting down, that is running the slow arithmetic of borrowed time. I spent those months getting to know Patricia. She drove down from Syracuse twice. We met at a restaurant in the West Village the first time, sitting across from each other in a booth. And for the first 15 minutes, we just looked at each other the way people do when they are mapping familiarity onto a stranger's face. She had Jennifer's eyes, my eyes. She had the same habit I had of pressing her thumbnail against her index finger when she was thinking. She laughed at the same angle, head tipping slightly to the left. She told me about Jennifer. She told me everything. College stories, childhood memories, the way Jennifer had been as a teenager, stubborn and funny and intensely loyal, the way she'd been in her 20s, working 2 jobs and saving and meeting with lawyers and refusing, in the face of every obstacle, to stop believing that she was going to get her daughter back. Jennifer had kept a journal. Patricia had it. She brought it on her second visit, wrapped in a cloth bag, and set it on the table between us, and I put my hand on its cover and understood that this was the most valuable object I had ever touched. December came. The proceedings in Manhattan Family Court concluded. Margaret Wu had prepared me for what she expected the outcome to be, but preparation does not make the moment itself smaller. The courthouse was on Center Street, the old federal-style building that anchors the southern end of Foley Square. The stone facade and the wide steps and the particular quality of winter light in lower Manhattan. We arrived early. Patricia sat beside me in the gallery. Jade was there. Tom was there. Uncle James had taken the train down from Boston. Linda and Robert sat at the respondents' table. Robert in his gray suit, Linda in a dark coat, her posture correct even now. I watched them from across the courtroom. I felt nothing that resembled anger. I had moved through anger months ago. What I felt now was something more like finality, the sensation of approaching the conclusion of a very long sentence. Judge Catherine Morrison entered. She was 60, black. with the deliberate economy of movement that comes from decades of managing courtrooms. She sat. She arranged her papers. She looked at both tables. She looked at me. She began to read. This court finds clear and convincing evidence that Sarah Mitchell, known as Sarah Brennan, was unlawfully removed from her biological mother's custody through fraudulent means. Her voice was measured and complete, each word placed with intention. The name change was accomplished through falsified documentation, including a forged judicial signature. No valid adoption was ever filed or approved. No valid relinquishment of parental rights was ever executed. The temporary guardianship agreement, the only legal document governing the respondent's care of the petitioner, explicitly preserved the biological mother's parental rights. She continued. She addressed each of Linda and Robert's arguments in sequence, systematically, thoroughly. The passage of time argument. Rejected. Statute of limitations told by concealment. The raised her therefore hours argument. Rejected, as it had no basis in New York State family law. The claim that Jennifer's death had resolved all outstanding questions of custody. Rejected with particular sharpness, the judge noting that death does not retroactively legitimize an unlawful taking. 12 minutes. 12 minutes of careful, inexorable dismantling. The court hereby restores Sarah Mitchell's original birth certificate, as issued by Onondaga County, New York, on September 14, 1995, listing Jennifer Ann Mitchell as biological mother. Patricia Nelson is recognized as legal next of kin for all medical decision-making purposes. The name change filed in Queens County in 1993 is hereby voided as obtained through fraudulent means. She looked at the restitution figure. Linda and Robert Brennan are ordered to pay restitution to the estate of Jennifer Ann Mitchell in the amount of $175,000, representing the legal fees Jennifer Mitchell incurred in attempting to locate her daughter and pursue custody, plus additional damages for the period of harm. And then Judge Morrison looked directly at Linda and Robert Brennan, not at her papers. At them, specifically, the way someone looks when they want to make sure they are understood. She said, "You stole a child and spent 29 years pretending she was yours. You denied her identity, her family, her truth, and her medical history. You obscured her origins for your own benefit. And when she became inconvenient, when she was ill and needed something from you, you discarded her. This court finds your actions reprehensible and your claimed parental rights entirely void." I had known the words were coming. Margaret had shown me the draft. But hearing them spoken aloud, in that courtroom, in that voice, complete, official, permanent, was different from reading them. I felt it physically, a release, like something that had been pulled tight my entire life quietly letting go. My chest opened. My shoulders dropped. I had not known, until that moment, how much I had been bracing. Linda started crying. Controlled crying. Linda style. Careful. Dignified. The kind of crying that refuses to become ugly. Robert sat expressionless, staring straight ahead, the same mask he'd always worn. But his hands on the table were flat and still in the particular way of someone who has run out of things to grip. I watched them for a moment. I had thought I might feel something in their direction. Triumph, satisfaction, a last flicker of something that resembled compassion. I found instead that I was simply done. They had been the central gravitational force of my life for 29 years, and now they were just two people in a courtroom, aging, diminished, stripped of the authority they had always wielded, sitting at a table with no attorney beside them and a judge's ruling reading back at them their full accounting. I turned away. The aftermath came in waves, and some of it was remarkable, and some of it was simply human. Marcus called me that night. My brother, my adoptive brother, though in the complexity of what he was to me, that label felt both accurate and insufficient. He said, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you weren't. That they had taken you. I thought maybe they'd adopted you when you were very young, and I knew things weren't right between you and them. But I didn't know it was like this. Did you believe them? I asked. When they said I was dramatic? When they said I created tension? A long silence. Long enough that it answered the question. Yes, he said. I'm sorry. I accepted the apology in the spirit it was given, not as a resolution of everything, but as a beginning of something. Marcus and I were strangers in many ways. We had been raised in the same house, and we had been raised in entirely different ones. Figuring out what, if anything, we were to each other would take time and honesty, and probably some of the same kind of careful reconstruction I was doing with everything else. I wasn't ready to close the door on him. Other things fell away more cleanly. Linda's circle of friends from her book club and her garden club, women she'd known for 20 years, stopped returning her calls within weeks of the ruling, information that reached me through Robert's brother, who sent me a brief message saying, I always wondered why you looked so different from them. Now I understand why they never wanted anyone asking questions. 3 of Linda's relatives, cousins on her mother's side, reached out to me directly. They did not know me. They offered, awkwardly and genuinely, something that resembled apology on behalf of a family they'd grown up in that had, it turned out, always known something was wrong. And then February came. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday, and I took the train to Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper East Side in the early morning before the city was fully awake, watching the dark streets of Brooklyn roll past the cab window and thinking about Jennifer Mitchell, who had been 19 years old and afraid, and had handed her daughter to her sister for safekeeping, and had spent the rest of her short life trying to get her back. I thought about the photo of her holding me, 3 weeks old, her expression. I thought about the journal Patricia had given me, which I had read in pieces over 3 months, carefully, the way you eat something that matters, slowly, not wanting it to end. Jennifer's handwriting was loopy and quick and slightly left-leaning. She wrote about me on almost every page, about what she imagined I would be like as I grew, about the lawyer she'd talked to, the money she'd saved, the plan she was building toward, about how she told herself every day that she was going to get me back. She hadn't been irresponsible. She had been a 19-year-old girl doing the best she could with an impossible situation, methodically, determinedly, lovingly. She had been exactly the kind of person whose daughter grows up to fight a courtroom battle to have her name restored. I woke up in recovery with Patricia holding my hand. She was wearing a hospital bracelet from her own procedure. The surgical team had taken her kidney that same morning, and she'd been moved to recovery before me. And she'd refused to be anywhere else when I came out of anesthesia. Behind her stood Uncle James, who had taken the early train from South Station in Boston and arrived at the hospital at 6 in the morning. In the corner, sitting quietly and watching me with an intensity that would have been unnerving if it hadn't been so clearly full of love, were 2 people I had met in person only twice. Jennifer's parents, my biological grandparents, Eleanor and Charles Mitchell, who were 79 and 76 years old, who had lived in Syracuse their entire lives, who had spent 29 years believing their granddaughter existed somewhere in the world but had no way to reach her. "Welcome back," Patricia said. Her voice broke on the second word, just slightly. She held my hand in both of hers. The relief I felt in that hospital room was unlike anything I had expected. I had anticipated physical relief, and that was real. The gradual awareness of my body beginning to function differently, the kidney doing its work, the toxins that had been accumulating clearing, the energy returning in increments over the following days and weeks. But the relief that filled the room was not primarily physical. It was something deeper, something I didn't have a precise word for. I had been right. That was part of it. The feeling I had carried my entire life, the hum beneath everything, the sense of wrongness, the persistent knowledge that something fundamental did not fit, had been accurate. It had been real. I was not too sensitive. I was not broken. I was not difficult. I had not been creating problems from nothing. I had been a stolen child in a house that had never fully accepted the theft. I was not the problem. They were. And now there was a court record saying so. 3 months after the surgery, I drove to Syracuse. Patricia met me at the door of her house, a small Victorian on a street of similar houses, well kept, with a wide front porch and a maple in the front yard that still held some of its spring green. Inside, her living room walls were covered in photographs. Her family, Jennifer's family, my family, documented across decades, and Jennifer. So many photographs of Jennifer. I stood in front of them for a long time. Jennifer at 5, at 10, at 16, at 19. Jennifer laughing, Jennifer studying, Jennifer holding me as a newborn with that expression on her face that I had memorized from the photograph in my kitchen. "She wanted you so much," Patricia said, standing beside me. "Every day. That was constant. She talked about you every day. I wish I'd known her. She knew you." Patricia's voice was steady and warm and certain. "For those first weeks, she was with you constantly. She loved you from the first second, and she never stopped." A pause. "She was so close when she died, Sarah. Her lawyer had told her she had a strong case. She was 6 months away from filing. If she had lived—" She stopped. "But she did love you, completely, for her whole life." I looked at a photograph of Jennifer at 19, holding me, and thought about Linda's words one last time. Unwanted baby. Irresponsible. Those words deployed with such confidence, such certainty, such complete conviction, as though saying them often enough and with enough authority could make them true, could retroactively rewrite the photograph in front of me, could change what Jennifer's face showed. It couldn't. Jennifer Mitchell had been a 19-year-old girl in an impossible situation who had made a plan and worked toward it and fought for her daughter until the day she died. That was not irresponsibility. That was love in the form that available resources allowed. Linda had simply taken what she wanted and renamed it rescue. I know who I am now. The process of becoming, or maybe of returning, has been slow and specific and not at all complete. Identity reassembled at 29 is not the same as identity known from birth. And I am not pretending that there is no loss in the version of this that I got. There is loss. There is Jennifer, who I will never know beyond photographs and a journal and the stories Patricia tells. There is 29 years of her family not knowing I existed. There are my biological grandparents, Eleanor and Charles, who are 79 and 76, who held me at the hospital and cried without trying to stop themselves, and who deserved to have had me in their lives long before now. The loss is real. I am carrying it. But so is this. I kept my first name. Sarah is mine regardless of who assigned it, and it fits me, and I chose to keep it. But I restored everything else. My last name is Mitchell now. Sarah Mitchell, the name on my original birth certificate, the name Jennifer chose before any of it happened. And when Linda and Robert's attorney sent a letter proposing that I drop the restitution claim and cease discussing the case with family members, in exchange for which they would consider resuming contact, I didn't respond. There are people who ask me if I'm angry, and the honest answer is that anger is present, but it is not the dominant thing. What is dominant is something closer to relief, and something closer to sorrow, and something closer to gratitude. All of them together, none of them canceling the others out. I am grateful for Patricia, who waited years hoping someone would find her. I am grateful for Jennifer, who fought her whole life for a daughter she never stopped loving. I am grateful for Eleanor and Charles, who are teaching me how to make Jennifer's mother's pie recipe on Saturday afternoons in their Syracuse kitchen. I am grateful for Jade, who looked at a Christmas photograph and asked me to look again. I am grateful for Tom, who never once told me I was exaggerating. I am grateful for Margaret Wu, who stands behind a desk in a midtown high-rise and dismantles constructed realities for a living. I am grateful for a DNA testing kit that cost $129. And I am grateful for something I didn't expect to be grateful for. The diagnosis. Stage 4, 18 months, a transplant list that would have taken 4 years. If my kidneys had not failed, I would not have called my parents. I would not have heard what they said. I would not have been forced to look at the photographs with new eyes, to order my medical records, to order the kit, to message a woman in Syracuse with dark curly hair who had been hoping someone would find her. For 29 years, I thought I was broken. I was just stolen. And now I'm home. There's something important I want to share before we go. What Sarah's story reveals goes far beyond one family's cruelty. Research in adoption psychology tells us that children separated from biological families experience a phenomenon called genealogical bewilderment, a persistent, often unexplained sense of incompleteness that can affect identity development, self-esteem, and even physical well-being for decades. Sarah felt this her entire life and was told repeatedly that the problem was her. It wasn't. Studies consistently show that when adoptees and donor-conceived individuals learn the truth of their origins, even in adulthood, they report significant improvements in psychological well-being, not because the knowledge removes pain, but because it validates what they already knew in their bones. The body keeps the score. The body knew the truth before Sarah did. When she heard her parents refuse to be tested, something cellular recognized what her conscious mind hadn't articulated yet. Truth doesn't disappear because it's hidden. It accumulates, quietly, until one Tuesday in March, one DNA kit, one cousin match finds you in a database and says, "I've been hoping someone would find me." Justice doesn't always arrive on time, but when it arrives completely. If this story moved you, if Sarah's truth hit something in you, please hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one, and I want to hear from you in the comments. Were you Team Sarah from the beginning? Or was there a specific moment when you fully understood what she was carrying? Tell me the moment. I want to read every single response. If you aren't subscribed yet, join us. Hit subscribe so you never miss what we put out here. And wherever you're watching this from, whether it's late at night in New York City or early morning in a small town you love, tell me where you are in the comments. I genuinely love knowing who's in this room with us. And before you go, there is a video waiting for you right there on your screen. I cannot tell you too much about it without giving away the moment that will make your jaw drop. But I will tell you this. It involves a woman who spent 15 years believing a story about herself that turned out to have been written by someone who needed her not to know the truth. What she finds changes everything, including the ending she had already accepted. Watch it. I promise you won't be able to stop once you start. See you there.